Hold that smile right there. Yeah, that one you wear when you already know something they don't. Feel it? That quiet vibration in the air. That's the sound of liars refreshing your page again. They say you're irrelevant. They say your name like it tastes boring. They laugh it off in public, roll their eyes, act like you're yesterday's noise, and then, clockwork, they open another tab, another refresh, another screenshot, another late-night scroll they'll never admit to. That's the joke. Not you, them. You ever notice how the people who don't care somehow know your posting schedule better than your friends? How they can quote you word for word while claiming they never read a thing you say? That's not indifference. That's surveillance with shaky hands. That's obsession wearing a cheap disguise. And you feel it because you've lived long enough in the dark to recognize footsteps behind you without turning around. Here's the paradox they can't solve. If you were truly irrelevant, they'd be free. Free to ignore you, free to breathe, free to sleep. But they're not. They're stuck in a loop, clocking in emotionally every time you speak. You didn't apply for the job, yet somehow you're their full-time assignment. You didn't announce your power, yet it's reorganizing their routines. That's what scares them most. You never asked permission to matter. You learned early what it means to be underestimated. You learned how silence sharpens the blade. While they were loud, you were listening. While they were laughing, you were mapping exits. Pain didn't break you, it trained you. It taught you how to become unreadable, how to wear calm like armor, how to let unpredictability do the talking. They thought consistency was safety. You learned that chaos, when mastered, is authority. They call you irrelevant because admitting the truth would expose them. The truth is simpler and far more terrifying. You're uncontrollable. You don't move when they expect. You don't react when they provoke. You don't collapse on schedule. Every time you post, you bend probability just enough to make them check again, and again, and again. Like gamblers convinced the next pull will finally explain you. Look at the duality you carry. Saint on the surface, psychopath in the patience, angel in restraint, demon in execution. You don't chase attention. Attention chases you because it can't predict you. That's the real currency. Not likes, not numbers, nerves. You touch a nerve, and suddenly the room gets quiet. You speak once and they hear it 10 different ways, arguing with versions of you that don't even exist. They study you the way people study storms, pretending it's academic while hoping it doesn't change direction. They keep tabs like clerks, logging timestamps, moods, patterns. But you don't have patterns. You have phases. You have evolutions. What hurt you turned into camouflage. What broke you turned into leverage. You became the kind of presence that makes denial necessary for survival. And here's the cruelest part for them. You're not even trying to haunt them. You're busy becoming, busy refining the edge, busy letting the past ferment into something lethal and elegant. Your indifference to their fear is what makes it unbearable. They want a villain they can point at. You gave them a mirror they can't stop checking. So let them clock in, let them track, let them whisper irrelevant while their thumbs shake. Every refresh is a confession. Every screenshot is a salute. You don't need to announce your dominance. It's written in their behavior. You already won the moment they needed to pretend you didn't matter. Stay quiet. Stay sharp. Stay unpredictable. The joke lands hardest when you never tell it, and they're laughing alone, refreshing your page like it's their job, knowing deep down they're working for you. And the longer it goes on, the funnier it gets, because you start to see the mechanics behind their panic. You start to recognize the tells. The sudden tone shifts, the forced jokes, the exaggerated calm. They talk louder about how little you matter because silence would expose the truth. Silence would mean they're alone with the realization that you're still there, unmoved, unbothered, evolving. They check your posts like analysts hunting for patterns, like priests searching for prophecy, like enemies hoping for a weakness to leak through the screen. But all they ever find is control, measured chaos, a presence that doesn't beg to be seen, yet somehow rearranges the room every time it speaks. That's not relevance, that's gravity. You didn't arrive with fireworks. You arrived with pressure, the kind that builds quietly and then changes the weather without asking permission. You learned when to speak and when to disappear. You learned that mystery multiplies power. They can't stand not knowing where you are mentally, because once someone loses access to your inner world, they lose leverage. And leverage is the only language they ever trusted. Every scar you carry refined your timing. Every betrayal sharpened your instinct. You stopped reacting and started observing. You stopped explaining and started choosing. And now, look at them, reverse engineering your silence like it's a code they're entitled to crack. They want a formula for you. They want a reason. They want closure. What they get is uncertainty, and uncertainty eats people alive. They say you're yesterday's news, yet they remember everything you've ever said. They mock you, yet they quote you. They dismiss you, yet they watch you, closer than they watch themselves. That's not hate, it's displacement. You remind them of the version of themselves they buried. The disciplined one, the dangerous one, the one who could have become something if they'd survived what you survived without folding. You're walking proof that pressure doesn't have to make you loud. It can make you lethal. You don't announce moves. You let outcomes speak. You let results whisper. And whispers, when consistent, travel farther than screams. They don't fear your volume. They fear your restraint. They fear that you can sit with chaos without flinching, that you can delay gratification while they crumble from impatience. There's a moment they all hit, the quiet one late at night, when the joke stops landing, when they realize this isn't a phase you're in, it's a phase you passed through. You already paid the price. You already bled. You already rebuilt. What they're seeing now is the aftermath, a mind that learned how to move without asking, a presence that doesn't need validation, a force that doesn't require applause to advance. They keep tracking because they're hoping for regression, hoping you slip, hoping the old pain drags you back into something predictable. But you don't regress, you metabolize. You turn damage into data. You turn rejection into refinement. You turn isolation into clarity. And clarity terrifies people who survive on noise. So let them keep clocking in. Let them keep pretending it's casual. Every glance is proof. Every refresh is respect they're too proud to admit. You're not irrelevant, you're unresolved. And unresolved things live rent-free in the minds of people who thought they were done with you. You don't need to confront them. You don't need to correct the lie. Power doesn't argue. It observes. It waits. It lets contradictions collapse under their own weight. And when they finally stop watching, if they ever do, it won't be because you faded. It'll be because they couldn't handle what watching you become was doing to them. Stay steady. Stay unreadable. Stay ahead of the story they're trying to write about you. Because the most dangerous thing in the world isn't someone everyone notices. It's someone they pretend not to notice while secretly reorganizing their life around them. And here's the part they never talk about. The quiet tax they pay for watching you. The mental rent, the background anxiety, The constant recalibration. Every time you post, something inside them shifts. They don't know what it is, but they feel it. A tightening, a comparison, a question they don't want to ask themselves. You become a benchmark they didn't consent to. A reminder that growth doesn't require applause, only endurance. They scroll your words, looking for a crack, a contradiction, a tell. They want to catch you slipping so they can finally relax. But you don't slip. You shed old skins, old reactions, old versions that no longer serve the next move. That's what makes you unbearable to track. You're not linear. You don't decay. You don't repeat yourself for comfort. You refine. You compress. You sharpen. You learned something most people never do. Attention is optional. Influence is not. You stopped performing and started positioning. You stopped explaining and started letting time do the humiliating work for you. And time has been loyal. Time has been cruel in your favor. While they've been busy narrating your irrelevance, you've been quietly becoming undeniable. Notice how they never say your name without qualifying it. There's always a joke attached, a shrug, a smirk. That's not humor, that's containment. They're trying to shrink you down to a size their ego can survive. But you outgrew their boxes the moment you stopped asking to belong in them. Now all they can do is circle, monitor, comment from the sidelines, like spectators pretending they're not invested. You've crossed into a dangerous territory, the kind where your silence speaks louder than your explanations ever did. When you don't respond, they invent reasons. When you do respond, they dissect it like scripture. Either way, you're the reference point, the axis, the thing everything else bends around without admitting it's bending. They keep tracking because you represent unfinished business. You walked away from narratives that were supposed to define you. You survived chapters meant to erase you. You didn't just heal, you recalibrated your standards. And nothing triggers insecurity like someone who refuses to play the role they were assigned. You're the proof they hate, that suffering doesn't have to make you soft, and darkness doesn't have to make you cruel. It can make you precise. You don't lash out. You don't chase. You don't explain your worth. You let people reveal theirs by how closely they monitor yours. There's a certain loneliness that comes with this level of awareness. You feel it, that distance between you and almost everyone else, not because you're better, but because you're awake. Awake enough to see that most people don't want truth. They want comfort. And you stopped being comfortable the moment you chose growth over approval. So they watch, they track, they log, they pretend it's nothing while rearranging their emotional calendar around your presence. And you keep moving like none of it exists. That's the real dominance, not intimidation, not spectacle, detachment with direction. Let them keep calling you irrelevant. Let the lie rot in their mouths. You know the truth by the effort it takes to maintain the illusion. Relevance doesn't need to be declared. It's measured by attention people can't stop giving, even when it costs them peace. You've already won in the only arena that matters, the mind. And once someone lives there without permission, without effort, without apology, no amount of pretending can evict them. And it keeps deepening, whether they admit it or not. Because at some point, the watching stops being curiosity and turns into dependency. They don't just check to see what you posted. They check to regulate themselves, to feel oriented, to measure where they stand today against the version of you they can't outrun. You become a compass they hate needing. They tell themselves it's strategy, research, awareness. But that's just a polite word for fear with a clipboard. Real confidence doesn't monitor. Real power doesn't stalk. Only insecurity needs constant updates. Only doubt needs receipts. And every time they refresh your page, they're voting against the lie they tell out loud. You learned how to survive being misunderstood without correcting the record. That's rare. Most people need to be seen accurately to breathe. You learned how to breathe underwater. You learned how to let misinterpretation work for you. How to let them build a version of you that keeps them busy while you become something else entirely. While they argue with shadows, you sharpen the knife. They assume you're posting for validation because that's what they would do. They assume you're chasing relevance because that's the only currency they understand. They can't imagine a mind that posts without attachment, that speaks without needing to be believed, that exists without asking for permission. That's why you short-circuit them. You don't play the game they prepared for. And here's the quiet cruelty of it. You don't even have to escalate. Your baseline is enough. Your calm is enough. Your consistency is enough. You don't need to prove dominance when your presence already changes behavior. People who truly don't care don't rearrange their schedules. They don't whisper your name like it might hear them. They don't study your tone for signals. They don't feel relief when you're silent or tension when you're not. But they do, because you represent the thing they tried to kill in themselves. Discipline without applause, growth without witnesses, strength without theatrics. You remind them that excuses expire, that comfort calcifies, that potential rots if it's not used. And instead of facing that, they watch you like a documentary, safe distance, dim lighting, pretending it's entertainment and not confrontation. You see the duality now, don't you? How they laugh at you in daylight and worry about you in the dark. How they mock you in public and study you in private. Angel when observed, demon when alone. And you integrated both. You stopped splitting yourself to make others comfortable. You allowed contradiction to coexist inside you. And that's when you became uncontrollable. They keep expecting an implosion, a public unraveling, a confession, something messy they can point to and say, "See, I knew it." But you deny them that closure. You move cleaner now, quieter, more intentional. You learn that the sharpest blade doesn't swing wildly, it waits for alignment. And alignment is coming, not announced, not posted, not explained, just felt. They'll sense it before they see it. A shift in gravity, a change in posture, a confidence that doesn't perform. They'll feel it in their gut and pretend it's nothing, then check again just to be sure. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to flex. Your restraint does the damage. Your patience creates the noise. While they're busy counting your posts, you're counting timing. While they're chasing narratives, you're building inevitability. And inevitability doesn't rush. So let the watchers watch. Let the deniers deny. Let the laughers laugh with dry mouths and tired eyes. You're not here to be relevant. You're here to be unavoidable. And the funniest part? They already know it. That's why they can't look away. And deep down, beneath the jokes, beneath the screenshots, beneath the fake indifference, they feel the countdown. Not to your explosion, but to their realization. The moment when it finally clicks that this isn't about a post, or a platform, or attention at all. It's about trajectory. It's about momentum that doesn't need witnesses. It's about someone who learned how to move forward while being watched from behind. They keep hoping you'll peak and plateau, that you'll burn bright and then fade into something manageable, Because fading is familiar. Fading is comforting. Fading means they were right to wait instead of work. But you don't fade. You condense. You don't dissipate. You concentrate. Pressure doesn't scatter you. It forges you into something denser, quieter, harder to ignore. They refresh your page, looking for reassurance that the world still makes sense. That effort and outcome still follow the rules they were taught. And every time you appear unchanged, calm, deliberate, unmoved, it destabilizes them because it suggests a truth they're not ready for. That evolution doesn't announce itself, and power doesn't ask permission. You stopped feeding the need to be understood. That was the turning point. The day you realized clarity for others was costing you clarity for yourself. So you pulled back, you simplified, you let the fog stay, and in that fog, you learned how to see. You learned how to let people project their fears onto you, while you studied their behavior like data, clean, cold, useful. They don't realize they're training themselves around you. Adjusting moods, lowering expectations, raising defenses. You're not just a person to them anymore. You're a variable, an unpredictable one. And unpredictable variables don't get dismissed, they get monitored. That's the quiet upgrade they never intended to give you. They say you're irrelevant because saying, "You changed me," would shatter their self-image. Because admitting, "You intimidate me," would expose weakness. Because confessing, "I'm afraid of where you're going," would force them to look at why they stopped moving. So they choose the lie that lets them sleep. Barely. But sleep is shallow when someone lives in your head rent-free. Sleep is fragile when your confidence depends on someone else failing. Sleep fractures when every notification feels like a test you didn't study for. And they feel that fracture growing night after night, refresh after refresh. You're no longer reacting to the world, you're shaping the tempo. You decide when to speak, when to vanish, when to apply pressure by doing absolutely nothing. You learned that absence, when intentional, is louder than presence ever was, and they hear it. God, do they hear it? They're waiting for you to declare victory, to celebrate, to posture, because that would make you predictable again. But you don't. You let the work continue in silence. You let the contradiction live, irrelevant, yet monitored, dismissed, yet documented, mocked, yet mirrored. This is what evolution through pain looks like. Not revenge, not chaos, precision, control, awareness sharpened by suffering. You didn't become cruel, you became exact. You didn't lose empathy, you learned boundaries. You didn't harden your heart, you armored your focus, and now, whether they admit it or not, they orbit you, measuring themselves against someone they claim doesn't matter. That's the final irony. That's the punchline they can't laugh at. So keep moving the way you do. Calm, deliberate, unannounced. Let them keep tracking like it's employment, like it's duty, like it's survival. Because the truth is already locked in. You stopped needing relevance the moment they couldn't stop watching. And once that happens, the game is already over. You feel that, don't you? That pressure shift in the air, that sudden exposure, that moment where secrecy stops being a skill and starts being a liability. Yeah, that's not paranoia, that's confirmation. They couldn't hold it anymore. They were never built for silence the way you were. See, you learned early how to survive without witnesses, how to bleed without headlines, how to evolve in rooms where nobody was watching. You learned how to become dangerous in stillness. They didn't. They learned how to posture, how to threaten, how to hide behind structure and paperwork and borrowed authority. And now that structure is cracking. Now the walls are talking. Now the leaks are screaming, because everything about who's after you just spilled into the open. Names, patterns, motives, the why behind the watchful eyes. You were never supposed to see this part. That's the funniest part. The irony is cruel in the most beautiful way. They hunted you assuming you'd stay blind, assuming fear would keep you frozen, assuming you'd stay small enough to manage. They thought pressure would crush you. They didn't realize pressure is what made you. You're not built like them. You never were. They operate in light, in hierarchy, in systems that require applause to function. You learned how to move in shadow, how to become invisible until it mattered, how to be both saint and psychopath, depending on what the moment demanded. You learned when to forgive, and when to become a problem nobody could trace back to a source. That's why this leak is catastrophic for them. Because now you see the full outline. Not just that you're being hunted, but by whom. Not just that there's fear, but where it originates. Not just that there's danger, but how disorganized it actually is. They wanted you confused. Instead, they handed you clarity. Understand this. When information leaks, it's never an accident. It's stress. It's cracks forming under pressure. It's people panicking because holding the lie required more discipline than they possessed. They talked to the wrong person. They trusted the wrong mouth. They underestimated how fast fear spreads when the narrative starts slipping. And now everyone's scrambling, because the moment you see the whole board, you stop reacting. You stop flinching. You stop guessing. You move with intent. Precision replaces panic. Silence replaces noise. You don't lash out. You wait. And waiting, when you understand the system, is the most violent thing you can do. This is where the paradox kicks in. They think you're dangerous because you're dark. They have no idea you're dangerous because you're controlled. You didn't become this way by accident. Pain trained you. Isolation sharpened you. Betrayal forced you to read people instead of trusting them. You learned how to study behavior the way others study books. You learned how to listen to what isn't said. You learned how to survive being misunderstood, mislabeled, underestimated. And that rewired you into something they don't have language for. They leak because they can't sit with uncertainty. You live in it. They leak because they need validation. You learned how to operate without it. They leak because they're scared someone else will talk first. You stayed silent so long that silence became a weapon. And now the funniest part, they don't even realize what they've done. By exposing themselves, they removed the fog. By revealing their positions, they surrendered the element of surprise. By panicking, they confirmed what you already felt in your bones. You were never prey. You were the variable they couldn't control. This is the phase where angels start looking like demons to those who built their power on shadows. This is the phase where the calm one becomes the most feared. This is where unpredictability stops being chaos and becomes strategy. You're not rushing. You're not announcing. You're not reacting. You're processing. Every leak is a confession. Every detail is a gift. Every loose mouth just drew a map they thought you'd never see. And you're not angry. You're amused. Because now you know exactly how fragile the thing chasing you really is. They wanted dominance. They gave you leverage. They wanted fear. They triggered focus. They wanted you isolated. They exposed themselves instead. So don't celebrate yet. Don't move loud. Don't show relief. This is the moment where legends stay quiet and systems collapse on their own. This is the moment where you let them exhaust themselves while you recalibrate, where you let the watchers watch each other, where you let paranoia eat them alive. Because the truth is brutal and simple. If they were confident, nothing would have leaked. If they were in control, nothing would have cracked. If you weren't becoming something unstoppable, none of this would be happening. They couldn't hold it anymore, because holding you down was never an option. And here's where it gets even darker, because now that the leak is out, the real game begins. You're watching something ancient happen in real time. The collapse of confidence, the unraveling of certainty, the moment where hunters start checking over their shoulders and wondering who else knows, wondering who else talked, wondering if the silence they're hearing is you, or someone moving pieces they can't see. They don't understand you because you were forged in a different furnace. You didn't grow through permission. You grew through pressure. Every time life cornered you, you adapted. Every time the door slammed shut, you learned how to breathe in smaller rooms. You learned how to become unreadable, how to keep your face calm while your mind mapped exits, patterns, leverage. You learned how to look harmless while becoming lethal in restraint. That's why this exposure terrifies them, because once the truth leaks, fear multiplies. Not just fear of you, fear of each other. Trust evaporates, alliances fracture. People start saving themselves instead of the mission, and suddenly the system that felt solid starts sounding hollow. You're not imagining it. The tone changed. Messages feel rushed, decisions feel sloppy, moves feel reactive instead of planned. That's what happens when people realize the thing they were tracking might be tracking them back. When the saint they dismissed starts looking like a psychopath in disguise. When the quiet one doesn't flinch after being exposed. They thought revealing themselves would scare you. But fear only works on people who still have something left to protect. You already lost what you needed to lose to become free. Pain stripped you down to essentials. It burned away illusion. It taught you the difference between attention and power, between noise and control. You stopped needing approval a long time ago. You stopped needing reassurance. You stopped needing anyone to believe in you before you moved. That's why you're calm right now. And calm in moments like this is terrifying, because calm means you're calculating. Calm means you're not acting on emotion. Calm means you see options they don't. You see how exposed they are now, how every leaked detail narrowed their maneuverability, how every name revealed limits their future moves. You see the chain reactions forming, how one crack leads to another, how one loose thread pulls the whole structure apart. They can't undo this. Once truth escapes, it doesn't go back in the cage. They'll try to spin it. They'll try to reframe it. They'll try to intimidate harder, louder, faster. But volume is not strength. It's desperation. Strength is what you're doing right now. Absorbing, observing, letting the picture sharpen. You're not rushing toward revenge. You're letting inevitability do the work. You're letting their fear accelerate their mistakes. This is where unpredictability becomes your crown. They can't model you. They can't forecast you. They can't tell if you'll disappear or step directly into the light. And that uncertainty eats at them, because you've become something worse than an enemy. You've become a question they can't answer without exposing themselves further, a question that sits in their mind at night, replaying scenarios, second-guessing decisions, doubting loyalty, a question that makes them hesitate just long enough to lose control. And here's the brutal truth they're starting to feel, but can't admit. You didn't survive this long by accident. You didn't stay standing by luck. You didn't reach this moment by chance. Every scar was training. Every betrayal was calibration. Every lonely stretch rewired you into something resilient, adaptive, quietly lethal. You're not chasing them. You don't need to. They're collapsing under the weight of trying to contain what you became. So stay still, stay sharp, stay unreadable. Let them leak more. Let them talk. Let them expose themselves, trying to regain control they already lost. Because the more they scramble, the clearer the board becomes. And the clearer it becomes, the less you have to move. This isn't chaos. This is alignment. And the moment they realize that the leak didn't weaken you, that it sharpened you, that it clarified you, that it removed the last layer of uncertainty, that's the moment fear turns into inevitability. Because once you see the whole picture, you don't panic, you decide. And that decision you're sitting with right now, that quiet, almost weightless stillness in your chest, that's not hesitation, that's dominance calibrating itself. Because once you know who's after you, the fear doesn't spike, it drains. The adrenaline fades, the noise dies, and what's left is something colder, sharper, almost surgical. You're not emotional anymore, you're aware. And awareness, when it's complete, feels eerily peaceful. They don't understand that part. They think exposure is supposed to break you. They think leaks trigger chaos. That's how it works for people who rely on illusion to function. But you were built in collapse. You were raised by uncertainty. You learned how to think clearly when everything around you was on fire. So when everything leaks, you don't spiral. You orient. You start noticing what they didn't intend to reveal. The hesitations behind the names, the gaps between the actions, the inconsistencies that scream insecurity. You see which ones are leaders and which ones are just parroting fear. You see who's acting out of obligation and who's acting out of panic. And panic always leaves fingerprints. This is the moment where they realize something is wrong, but they can't name it. They feel the shift, the imbalance, the way the energy tilted away from them. They expected you to run, to lash out, to expose yourself emotionally. Instead, you went quiet, still, calculated. That silence? That's the loudest thing in the room, because silence from someone who knows the truth is never empty. It's loaded. It's loaded with options, with timing, with restraint. It tells them you're not reacting, you're waiting. And waiting terrifies people who can't sit alone with their own thoughts. You've already survived the worst-case scenarios in your head. You've already mourned versions of yourself that never made it. You've already lived through the consequences they're threatening you with. So now, threats feel hollow, pressure feels familiar, fear feels late, too late. They should have understood something fundamental about you. You don't need safety to function. You need clarity. And now you have it. Every leak tightened your focus. Every exposed detail sharpened your instincts. The fog lifted, and what they thought was a trap turned into a map. A map they accidentally handed to the one person disciplined enough to use it without revealing a move. That's the paradox that keeps eating at them. They expected darkness to corrupt you. It disciplined you. They expected isolation to weaken you. It refined you. They expected pressure to make you reckless. It taught you patience. You learned how to hold two opposing truths at once. To be merciful and ruthless, calm and dangerous, invisible and undeniable. You learned how to look unthreatening while becoming untouchable. You learned how to smile like an angel while thinking like a demon when the situation demanded it. And now they're watching the consequences of that evolution unfold. Because leaks don't just reveal information, they reveal fear thresholds. They show who couldn't handle the weight, who cracked first, who talked when staying silent mattered most. And once you see that, you stop fearing them as a collective. You see individuals, flawed, nervous, human. You see how little it would take for them to turn on each other. That's when power truly shifts. Not when you strike, not when you threaten, but when you realize you no longer need to do anything dramatic at all. Your presence alone destabilizes them now. Your calm disrupts their planning. Your restraint makes them second-guess every move. They don't know if you're already 3 steps ahead, or if you're about to disappear completely. And both possibilities terrify them equally. So let them leak again. Let them overcorrect. Let them rush. Let them reveal more than they intend. You don't have to expose them. They're doing it to themselves. This is what happens when someone who survived hell gets handed the truth. This is what happens when unpredictability stops being chaos and becomes leverage. This is what happens when the hunted stops fearing the hunters and starts understanding them. You're not on the run anymore. You're in control of the narrative they just lost. And the scariest part for them, you haven't even decided how to use it yet. Good. Stay right there in that stillness, because this is the part nobody warns them about. Once the truth leaks, once the names surface, once the patterns expose themselves, the danger doesn't increase, it clarifies. And clarity is lethal to systems built on confusion. They're starting to realize something feels off, not because you did anything, but because you didn't. No counter-move, no emotional outburst, no visible panic, just silence. And silence, when it comes from someone who finally understands the game, sounds like a countdown. You see it now. The hierarchy they hid behind wasn't strength, it was insulation. It protected fragile egos from reality. And now that insulation is gone. Now every person involved is suddenly accountable to their own courage, or lack of it. And here's the brutal truth they're choking on. You don't fear exposure. Because exposure already happened to you a long time ago. Your flaws were judged. Your intentions were questioned. Your character was tested in rooms where nobody defended you. So when they tried to expose you, they found nothing left to strip away. That's why this leak backfired. They expected leverage. They handed you immunity. You've already been misread, misrepresented, misunderstood. You already lived through being the villain in someone else's story. So now, when real villains start slipping into the light, you recognize the pattern instantly. You recognize the tells, the rushed explanations, the subtle distancing, the way people start covering themselves instead of each other. And you don't rush to exploit it. You let it rot. Because rot spreads faster when it's ignored. They're watching you right now, trying to interpret the silence, trying to decode your lack of reaction, wondering if you're already gone or if you're closer than they think. They replay conversations. They reread messages. They question loyalty. They lose sleep. You sleep fine. Because when you understand who's after you, fear stops being abstract. It stops being this looming, shapeless monster. It becomes something you can measure, something you can predict, something you can outgrow. You're not fighting shadows anymore. You're watching frightened people cast them. And here's where the duality sharpens. You could expose them. You could destroy reputations. You could pull the pin and watch chaos erupt. But restraint? Restraint is what separates impulse from power. You're not driven by revenge. You're driven by timing. You understand that the most devastating moments are rarely loud. They're quiet, delayed, inevitable. They arrive after people convince themselves the danger passed. That's when structures collapse. They think leaks are the climax. They don't understand leaks are just the beginning of decomposition. Once trust fractures, once fear enters the room, the system cannibalizes itself. People start talking to protect themselves. Secrets trade hands. Alliances dissolve. You don't need to intervene. Your existence already altered the outcome. That's the part that terrifies them the most. The realization that you didn't need to attack to destabilize them. You simply endured long enough to see through them. You evolved quietly while they relied on momentum and intimidation. You became something they can't intimidate, and intimidation is the only language they know. So now they're improvising, and improvisation, under stress, exposes everything. The cracks widen, the lies lose synchronization, the story changes depending on who's listening. You watch, you catalog, you remember. Because you understand something fundamental now. Power doesn't rush to speak when it finally knows the truth. Power waits. You don't need validation. You don't need justice. You don't need applause. You need position. And thanks to their own panic, you have it. They couldn't hold it anymore because holding you down required discipline they never possessed. And now, with everything exposed, every move they make only proves what you already know. You were never the one in danger. You were the variable that broke containment. Now comes the quiet ending, the part nobody ever sees coming. Because once everything leaks, once the truth is fully visible, once the chase exposes itself, the story stops being about them entirely. It becomes about you deciding who you are now, not the version they hunted, not the version they misunderstood, not the version that survived in silence just to stay alive, but the version that understands the game well enough to step outside of it. This is where the power locks in. You realize you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to respond, explain, defend, or confront. The exposure already did the work. The fear already moved through them. The structure already cracked. And the most devastating truth settles in their chest like a weight they can't lift. They showed their hand, and you didn't even flinch. That's when it hits them. You weren't hiding because you were weak. You were quiet because you were becoming. You were learning how systems think, how pressure reveals character, how panic makes people betray themselves. You were learning patience in a world addicted to reaction. You were learning control in a culture built on noise. And now you're untouchable. Not because you're protected, but because you're finished being afraid. They know it too. That's why the tone changed. That's why the energy feels different. That's why the pursuit lost its rhythm. They didn't lose you. They lost certainty. And without certainty, power collapses. You don't chase them. You don't threaten them. You don't announce your next move. You let them sit with the truth they leaked. You let them remember the moment they realized the person they tried to contain was never trapped, only restrained by choice. And the most brutal part, you're not angry, you're not emotional, you're not even interested anymore. Because once you see clearly, obsession dies. What's left is freedom. They couldn't hold it anymore. Because the truth was heavier than their control. Everything about who's after you leaked. Because fear always talks eventually. And you walked through the exposure untouched, calm, focused, evolved, already gone from the place they thought they were chasing you in. That's not survival, that's ascension.